Justinian the Great was the man who came closest to restoring the Roman Empire after its western half fell. So, how did he get to the position he was in, and how did it end up not working out? Initially, I was going to just do a video about the plague of Justinian, and then I realised it wouldn't make sense without the context, and then I thought, may as well just do a series about why I think the Roman Empire was not restored, because I believe it could have been had certain things not happened. However, here we are talking about Justinian. So let's give context. Here is a map of the Roman Empire in 476, before it was sacked by the Goths. Here is a map of Europe post 476, after the Goths sacked Rome, and they basically got rid of Romulus Augustulus, or Romulus Augustus, either name is fine. They got rid of him, deposed him, and then eventually found Julius Nepos, I believe, in Illyria, which is like the northern Balkans area. They found him there and they killed him too. And after he died, the Roman Emperor Zeno, who was the first Roman Emperor in the East, the Eastern Roman Empire continued on after the West had fallen to the Goths, and Zeno dissolved the Western Senate and the Western legal system, and just the Western state as a whole. He dissolved it and declared it over. He was the first Roman Emperor to rule over its eastern half, and the eastern half was on its own. So he was from the Leonid dynasty, which started with Leo the First the Thracian, in like 380, I believe. And the last of this dynasty was Anastasius the First. I would go over them, but like they kind of continued on the Eastern Roman Empire. But there's interesting stuff that happened during their time, the Leonid dynasty. But I prefer to get to the good stuff, so I'll maybe do that in another video. But next came the Justinian dynasty. They're famous. Here is a coin of the first emperor of the Justinian dynasty, who was Justin the First. He was a military officer from Dardania. Here's a map of where Dardania was. It's modern day Serbia and North Macedonia and Kosovo, if you recognise Kosovo as a state. But it's that area, it's the Balkans just above Greece. And he basically got raised to power by the army. He was basically the same thing as the barracks emperors from the Crisis of the 3rd Century video that I did. He's the same thing as a barracks emperor. So he was raised to power by the army in 518 AD. He was 68 years old, so quite old to start off on the throne, and he was aided by his nephew Justinian. So Justin's reign lasted 9 years, and he was succeeded by his nephew, his long-term friend, and short-time co-ruler, Justinian the Great. Yay! So who was Justinian? Well, as I said, he was Justin the First's nephew. He was born in 482 in Dardania as well, to a poor, like, farming peasant family, basically. So, interesting fact, he was the first emperor of the Roman Empire to be born after the West fell. And he was also the last to speak Latin as his native language. So you can definitely see the transition from the Roman Empire of antiquity into the Byzantine Empire of the Middle Ages. Beginning here, I believe, because before that it was kind of continuation of Rome, but with Justinian you have the last native Latin speaking Roman Emperor, and the first to be born with no memory of the Western Roman Empire. So there you go. But he married a woman called Theodora in 525. Here's a picture of Theodora. The magic of video editing. She had previously been a courtesan, and she was also not of an aristocratic background, so this marriage ruffled the feathers of the kind of up themselves Byzantine aristocracy or Roman aristocracy. They did not like this. Although, see, to be honest, I like them as a couple, because she always supported him. She had been a key supporter of Justinian in his early days, and he stayed with her for his whole life, or for her whole life. She died in 548, so she died like 17 years before him. So, but they definitely stuck together, and they were a strong unit and a strong team, and she actually became quite an influential figure in Roman politics. So, Justinian, like Aurelian, wanted to restore the Roman Empire for different reasons. I mean, in Aurelian's day, the crisis of the 3rd century trisected the empire, I'll say. But in Justinian's day, the West has fallen entirely, and he basically makes it his mission to restore the Roman Empire. So here is a map of what the Eastern Roman Empire would have looked like at the beginning of Justinian's reign. And here is a map of it in 565 at its greatest extent after Justinian died, or upon Justinian's death rather, I should say. He was known as the Emperor who never sleeps. He was known for his great energy in the office and his just general positive attitude to wanting to restore this, that he made it his life's mission. And I feel he was the Byzantine George Harrison. Now, I know quite a lot about like the history of the Beatles and stuff, and George Harrison in the solo years, unlike John and Paul, basically when he wanted something done on his album, he would get in the best people for the job. He wouldn't get in kind of these like yes men, like lesser than John and Paul guys. It's not all the time that they did that, but they did it quite a lot. But in George Harrison's albums, he had like well-known people. He had Roy Orbison, he had Jeff Lynne, he had Bob Dylan, he had Mal Evans, but he had Eric Clapton. He had all these people on. He did shows with well-known musicians. He didn't just do shows with like, oh, I'm putting together a band and I'm the star, which John and Paul kind of did to an extent. Not to diss Denny Lane of Wings fame, but he wasn't a Beatle, and I don't think he was on the Beatles level, but this is not a Beatles video. Justinian, like George, basically, if he knew that he wouldn't be able to do this on his own, so he got the most talented people that he could. He got Tribonian was his legal advisor. I'm going to put the pictures up in order. So he got Tribonian as his legal advisor. He had Peter the Patrician, who headed the bureaucracy in the palace and acted as a diplomat. He had his finance ministers, John the Cappadocian and Peter Barsames. I've only seen that word written down, so don't get at me if I pronounce it wrong. Just tell me in the comments, please. Their tax collecting was legend. The tax collecting of John the Cappadocian and Peter Barsames, which I kind of think that's a very backhanded compliment, isn't it? It's like they must have been well liked. Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh, what are they known for? Oh, they're fantastic tax collectors. It's like, it's just a bit of a backhanded compliment, I would think. But finally, the most famous by far of Justinian's court, and the most flashy, were his generals Belisarius, who's very well known, I quite like him, Belisarius and Narses, his two generals who would aid him in his campaigns of restoration. So, Justinian seems to me to definitely have the same mindset as Roman emperors from previous eras. It wasn't this anemic, pathetic Roman Empire that had existed up until that point. It was rich and it was booming, and Justinian was going to restore the western provinces. He was going to do it. This was his life's work. So, where do we start with Justinian's work and his reign? We start with his brand new legal code, which is another departure from the Roman Empire to the Byzantine era, called the Corpus Juris Civilis. If I've got that wrong, comments, you know what to do. That was in Latin, obviously, and most of the laws were written in Latin as well. What did this code of law do? It definitely, one of the main things it did was furthered women's legal position. Like, Theodora definitely had an influence over this because she had been a courtesan, which was a prostitute, and it definitely gave protection to women who might be forced into prostitution. And there were things like female criminals had to be guarded by women, so like to stop sexual assault. So out of this code of laws, it had previously codified precedents that had been set since the time of Trajan onwards. So things that weren't written down but were the done thing, he codified them. But he also came up with new laws, which were the novelli, or the novelli, or the novella, I'm not sure. But those new laws were written in Greek, so that was the language of the everyday person in the Eastern Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire. You can definitely see the transition here, can't you? Like, definitely see it. And Justinian, along with Tribonium, is actually in the US House of Representatives in the main chamber because of his contributions to law. You can see the two seals here and here, with Justinian there and Tribonian there. But it's mad that like it remains influential until now. Like, it's still influential today. It's amazing, really. So, the Sassanid War, or the Iberian War of 527 to 532. Now, to give some background on this, the Romans and the Persians had been fighting each other for the last 300 to 400 years. It had been massive. There had been many wars and there were various truces, and one of the Roman emperors ended up in a Persian prison and stuff. But I won't go into that just now. There were some border skirmishes at first, but this was the fault of Justin I. This was his parting gift to Justinian, was a Sassanid problem and a Sassanid war in Iberia, which Iberia at that point was the modern day area of like Armenia and Georgia, like the Caucasus, rather than Spain and Portugal, rather than the Iberian Peninsula of today. That's what it was known. It was kind of Central Asia. And initially, the Byzantines under Belisarius were very successful. They won double victories in 530. But at 531, they were defeated at Callinicum, and this was a big defeat. So Justinian, in response to this, signed the Pax Aeterna, which is in Latin, and in Greek, this was I'm gonna go for this here. Aperantos Eirene. That's what it is in Greek. That's the eternal peace in English. So this was supposed to be, like, obviously eternal. This was supposed to be the peace forever, like the forever peace. Justinian gave Khusro I of Persia, he gave 11,000 pounds of gold in 532. So that's the end of the Vandal War. Let's go back to Constantinople to see what's going on there. I mean, while it was all very well and good that Justinian was going to restore the glory of Rome and all that stuff, his citizens in Constantinople did not care about that. They didn't care about his high-minded ideals that he read in a book somewhere. They didn't like the fact that he married a whore. They didn't like the fact that he married a non-aristocrat. None of the things he was doing. His advisors weren't very popular either. They were like low-ranking people because meritocracy is wrong. You see, you need to do the good thing and basically use nepotism to get anywhere. It's actually it's mad that people used to think like that. But he wasn't very popular among the aristocracy. But we don't know specifically what sparked the Nika riots. We know that he wasn't very popular at the time, despite the fact that he had just secured the Pax Aeterna. but he wasn't very popular with the people, and he wasn't very popular with the aristocracy. So the aristocracy were basically fermenting revolt for years in Constantinople, and he was nearly overthrown by these riots. Like, they were really bad riots. He was forced into hiding in the palace for days, and he ended up dismissing Tribonian and some of his other advisors because it was demanded of him, because the people in the aristocracy didn't like them, so he had to get rid of them to keep his throne, basically. And the plan was to replace Justinian with Hephaestus, who was one of Anastasius's nephews, Anastasius, the last emperor of the Leonid dynasty. And he actually was planning to leave Constantinople, Justinian, by sea. He was planning to leave Constantinople until the whole thing blew over. But Theodora refused, and you can definitely see that they worked well as a team, and they loved each other, and they were prepared to stand by each other when he didn't run away, leave the city. He stayed with Theodora when she refused to leave, which is quite heartwarming, really. But he ordered his generals to suppress the riots. So I don't want to paint a picture that Justinian was this lovely man. He was a conqueror, or he was the man who ordered conquest. And he got Belisarius and Narses to put down the riots in the most brutal way imaginable. It was done brutally and swiftly and efficiently. In the following days, 30,000 civilians were murdered in the Hippodrome by the army, according to Procopius, who was a historian of the day. All of Anastasius's nephews were killed on the advice of Theodora. Justinian didn't want that, but that's what he ended up thinking was necessary because his wife said so. But it was against his conscience, so there's a good point about it. But these riots, the one thing that they did do for him, the one good point was they did give him an excuse to build, to go on a massive construction spree, basically. He built many buildings in that time, although the most famous of those was the Hagia Sophia, or the Hagia Sophia, I believe the Greeks call it. That's how it's supposed to be pronounced in the original Greek. So let's talk about the Vandal Wars. So after Rome fell, the Vandals, who were a Germanic tribe, had set up shop in North Africa, as in Tunisia, Algeria, that area. They had set up shop there, so that was the first place that Belisarius was sent to go on his reconquest. And in the place of the Roman Emperor at that time, there was King Gelimer, was the king of the Vandal kingdom that was there at the time. And during this war, actually quite a lot of territory was won back. Most of the islands, like Sardinia and Corsica, were won back. The African side of Gibraltar was won back, the Gibraltar Straits, and the Balearic Islands were won back, as well as all of North Africa from about Cyrenaica all the way along to where Algeria is now. So quite a lot of territory was won back, and actually Sicily as well. Here's a map of the Byzantine Empire, from the fall of the West up until the Vandalic War, and here's a map of the Roman Empire after the Vandalic War. It's quite a lot of territory won back, isn't it? Which is quite a successful campaign for the first war ever fought by the Byzantines. So, just precisely how successful was this campaign that captured back a lot of land for the Byzantines? Well, the Vandals were caught completely off guard initially when Belisarius landed. He landed in what would have been modern-day Tunisia, and they were pushed back very quickly. And in December 533, that's months into the war, Carthage was taken back. And Carthage is not exactly a small win for a few months into the campaign. It's a very old and prosperous city that was just won back in months. Amazing campaign, I think, in my opinion, from Belisarius. Although not all was well, war and mutinies would continue on for about 15 years until 548, in which period of time Africa was depopulated because of all the war and the mutiny. Like 5 million people died according to Procopius. And that's not even just from war, that's from famine and starvation and like just general fighting and poor quality of life. It's terrible actually. And it ended up costing the Byzantine state about £100,000 of gold. Like that's genuinely huge that they had £100,000 of gold. Like that's mental. But the Vandalic War was done in more detail on Kings and Generals, which I definitely recommend that you check out. So I think you should go there for more detail. I'm just giving context for talking about the Justinian plague. So, the first leg of the campaign of Italy. This is the point where I'm going to leave it until next video because something interesting happens next video. So, this is going to be at least 2 parts, maybe 3. But let's talk about the first leg of the Italian campaign. Now, what was going on in Italy since the fall of the Roman Empire? The Western Roman Empire, rather. Well, the Ostrogoths, who had been the ones that had sacked Rome, which just meant, Austro just meant east, so it was Visigoth was Western Goth and Ostrogoth was Eastern Goth. So, the Ostrogoths sacked Rome and set up the Ostrogothic kingdom, which encompassed all of the Italian peninsula, Sicily, and much of Illyria, and like some of what is today Austria. So quite a large slab of land carved out for the Ostrogoths, really. But they were having dynastic problems. So in Italy, Queen Amalasuntha was being held hostage by a usurper called Theodahad, and he eventually killed her in 535. The previous Ostrogothic king had died, and this usurper had taken his place violently and imprisoned his wife and killed her. So, using this advantage of the stronger Byzantine state compared to the weakened and an infighting Ostrogothic state, Belisarius invaded Sicily in 535 with just 7,500 men, which isn't actually a massive force when you think about it. Like, it's big, but it's not exactly Hannibal. Like, I mean, Hannibal in 216 BC at Cannae, sorry, had like 30,000 guys, 30 to 50,000 guys. So, it's strange that it's such a small army for such a successful state. But he basically, in 535, advanced into the foot of Italy. Naples was sacked. Rome was finally Roman once again on the 9th of December 536. I can't actually imagine. They must have been absolutely ecstatic about that. Like, honestly, imagine, like, your whole thing was restoring the Roman Empire, and you had made it your life's work to do that, and here you are, having pushed the Goths back, having conquered the Vandals, having gotten all the islands in the Mediterranean, the major islands, back under your control. Actually imagine setting foot in the eternal city of Rome. Genuinely imagine that, as a conqueror, no less. Like, you'd be ecstatic. Theodahad did try and win it back in 537 to 538. He besieged it for a year, and this eventually failed. He didn't manage to take it back. But at this point, Narses was sent in to aid Belisarius by Justinian, and they ended up bickering like bitchy teenagers on the playground. So this ended up slowing down the campaign, and eventually Narses was recalled. But before he was recalled, despite the slower pace of the campaign, they did manage to capture Milan. It was won back, although this was not to last. The Ostrogoths won it back in 539, and it was at this point that Narses was recalled. So Belisarius from here marched on to Ravenna, which he reached in 540. And to give an idea of what kind of impact this would have had, Ravenna was the Ostrogothic capital and had been the Western Roman capital for quite some time. So that did make a big impact on the Ostrogoths. So what they did was they hailed him as Western Roman Emperor, which I think made Justinian's insecurity from the Nika riots flare up again, and he sent his envoys to Italy to say anything north of the Po River would remain Ostrogothic, would remain in their control, would not be brought back into the Byzantine fold. So Belisarius reclaimed Ravenna, walked through the streets, faked acceptance, feigned acceptance of the offer to be Western Roman Emperor, and was then recalled to Constantinople. A conqueror and a triumph was held. So I think that's where we'll leave our story of Belisarius and Justinian and Narses and all the other lovable characters for today. We will come back soon with the part 2 of this video about what happened next and how the Byzantines ended up not being able to restore the western provinces in their entirety, but they made a good go of it. So if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, give it a share, give me a subscription, give me all your stuff. No, don't give me all your stuff, but thanks very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, I'll see you in the next video.